Would you leave your father alone as he fights for his life? Imagine sitting thousands of miles away, hearing that the man who raised you is in a hospital bed, battling a crisis that could end everything. And you don't call, you don't visit, you don't even reach out. That is exactly the situation unfolding right now with Meghan Markle and her father, Thomas Markle. The story isn't just about a medical emergency. It's about a fractured family, public pressure, and the harsh glare of the media magnifying every decision. But the question that haunts everyone is simple. Why would someone abandon the very person who gave them life when it mattered the most? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Thomas Markle, at 81 years old, faced a situation that no one ever wants to imagine. A blood clot had taken hold in his lower leg, turning it from painful swelling to blackened tissue almost overnight. The doctor's verdict was swift and uncompromising. The leg had to be removed immediately. A 3-hour operation later, Thomas emerged with part of his left leg gone. The situation was life-threatening, and the stakes were higher than anyone could have anticipated. The medical team warned that infection, sepsis, or gangrene could strike at any moment. The next 2 or 3 days were critical. Every moment mattered. And yet, Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, remained silent. No calls, no messages, no sign that she would come to her father's side. This story isn't just about physical health. It's about the cost of estrangement, the way decisions ripple through a family, and how the public reacts when someone in the spotlight makes choices that seem cold, unfeeling, or shocking. Thomas has not seen Meghan's children, Archie and Lilibet. The grandchildren he had dreamt of meeting remain strangers to him, even as he faces one of the most critical chapters of his life. His son, Thomas Jr., has been vocal about the gravity of the situation, describing the sudden deterioration of his father's health, the emergency trips to local hospitals, and the eventual transfer to a larger facility in Cebu, Philippines. Doctors made it clear there was no option. It was life or death, and the operation was non-negotiable. Imagine the weight on a family when a parent's life hangs in the balance. Think about the anxiety, the helplessness, and the emotional strain. Thomas Markle had already survived heart attacks, a stroke, and even a natural disaster, a significant earthquake. He is no stranger to adversity, yet this is a crisis that tests not only his body, but also the emotional bonds of his fractured family. His daughter, Samantha Markle, spoke of hope and prayers, describing her father as a strong man, someone who had endured so much, yet now faced a situation that no amount of resilience could entirely mitigate. And then there is Meghan Markle's silence. It has now stretched over several years, ever since she and Thomas became estranged in 2018. The reasons for their estrangement are layered. Disagreements, personal choices, the pressure of the royal spotlight, and perhaps actions that both sides have struggled to reconcile. But as the public watches, one question dominates every headline, every tweet, and every speculation. Why would Meghan not make contact now, when the stakes are nothing less than life and death? The world has watched royal families face crises, both public and private. Scandals, divorces, health emergencies. These moments are often magnified in the media, dissected endlessly, and debated in every corner of social media. And in the midst of this, a family's private pain becomes a public spectacle. Yet, beyond the headlines, there is a human story. Thomas Markle is a father who has lived through decades of challenges, and now, as his life hangs in balance, he faces not only a medical emergency, but the profound heartbreak of estrangement from a daughter he once raised, loved, and nurtured. Consider the contrast. Meghan Markle, now a global public figure with immense influence and visibility, remains absent. She has achieved career milestones, raised children, and faced her own share of public battles. Yet when the most personal crisis hits, the health of her father, she has not reached out. Her absence speaks volumes. Silence, in this moment, has become louder than words. It sparks debate, speculation, and a mix of judgment and empathy from the public. The questions are relentless. Is this about pride, fear, estrangement? Or is it a complex calculus of personal and public life, where every choice is scrutinized and every action carries a consequence? But what makes this story even more compelling and painful is the human immediacy of it all. Thomas Markle's left leg has been amputated below the knee. He faces the possibility of losing more. Infection is a constant threat. Doctors are extremely concerned. The next few days could decide the trajectory of his survival. And yet, Meghan's response, or lack thereof, casts a shadow over the situation. This isn't just a family drama. It is a study in the intersection of duty, love, estrangement, and the unforgiving gaze of the world. So why does this matter now? It matters because time is not on Thomas Markle's side. Every day, every hour, brings new risks. And every moment without contact from Meghan is another moment of tension, heartbreak, and unanswered questions. The public watches not merely because they are fascinated by royalty, but because this is a story of human emotion writ large: love, disappointment, conflict, and the heavy burden of choices we make about the people closest to us. Imagine being Thomas Markle in his hospital bed. Imagine the pain, the fear, and the awareness that the daughter you raised is far away, unreachable. Imagine trying to reconcile the love you feel for her with the absence that defines your relationship. And now imagine the media, the world, and even your own family weighing in, judging, and commenting, all while you focus on survival. It is a moment fraught with tension, emotion, and an almost unbearable sense of drama. And the question lingers: will Meghan Markle reach out in time? Will she bridge a gap that has been years in the making? Or will the estrangement remain, possibly forever? The answers are uncertain, the stakes are high, and the unfolding drama is exactly why millions of people around the world are glued to every update. This isn't just news. This is a human story, one that will test loyalty, compassion, and perhaps even forgiveness. Could a father truly prepare for the day his daughter steps into a world he can barely comprehend? For Thomas Markle, the years leading up to Meghan's royal wedding were a mixture of pride, anxiety, and quiet apprehension. He had watched his daughter grow from a determined, independent young girl into a woman whose choices would inevitably reshape his understanding of family, loyalty, and public scrutiny. Long before the cameras and tabloids, there was a bond, sometimes fragile, sometimes strained, but real. Thomas always believed that family relationships required effort. He was not a man to hand out praise lightly, but he valued connection, respect, and communication. He and Meghan had shared moments of closeness, laughter, and ordinary family routines that are often invisible to the public. Yet as Meghan's career accelerated, her ambitions expanded, and her life entered the glare of Hollywood, these moments became increasingly rare. The balance between parental concern and personal autonomy began to shift, setting the stage for misunderstandings that would grow into estrangement. When Meghan was cast in roles that brought her fame, Thomas watched with cautious pride. He celebrated her achievements quietly, aware that the industry she had chosen was unpredictable, ruthless, and often unforgiving. At the same time, he worried about the influence of external forces, agents, publicists, and media attention, that could sway his daughter's decisions. The tension was subtle at first. A raised eyebrow over a choice, a cautious warning about the press, an attempt to offer guidance that was sometimes misinterpreted as criticism. As the royal engagement approached, the stakes were unimaginably high. Suddenly, the world was watching every interaction, every comment, every family dynamic. Thomas Markle, who had spent decades orchestrating lighting and angles for productions behind the scenes, found himself in a spotlight that offered no control. The press was relentless. Paparazzi photographs captured moments that, stripped of context, became fodder for public debate. Suddenly, a father's private concerns were transformed into public speculation about estrangement, disapproval, or even personal failings. Despite these pressures, there were moments of connection. Thomas reportedly helped Meghan with wedding preparations, offering advice on attire, protocol, and presentation. He tried to participate in the excitement and joy of the engagement while grappling with his own reservations and anxieties. For a man who had always valued decorum, these moments were bittersweet. He was proud, but also painfully aware that the coming weeks would test both his patience and his emotional resilience. The media, however, seized on minor tensions and amplified them. A photograph taken at an engagement event, a comment misquoted, or a gesture misinterpreted could become a narrative of conflict. Thomas was suddenly not just a father. He was a character in a global story. The emotional weight of this shift cannot be understated. For a parent, seeing your child navigate life under relentless scrutiny is stressful, but seeing yourself portrayed in ways that feel unfair, even hostile, adds an entirely new dimension of strain. Communication between Thomas and Meghan became increasingly complicated. Emails, phone calls, and attempts at dialogue were filtered through advisors and agents. What might have been a simple conversation became a delicate negotiation. Each word carried the potential to be misconstrued. Each action weighed for both personal and public consequences. It is no wonder that tensions escalated during this period. The very tools that could have facilitated connection, technology, advisors, and media channels, sometimes became barriers, distancing rather than uniting. Adding to the pressure was Meghan's desire to protect her future and her image. The engagement to Prince Harry was not only a personal milestone. It was a transformation into a life that required navigating centuries of royal tradition, expectations, and scrutiny. For Thomas, this meant reconciling pride in his daughter's achievements with the sense of being increasingly excluded from her decisions and experiences. He loved her deeply, yet he also felt the sting of being sidelined, a feeling that would only intensify in the coming months. Family dynamics, already delicate, were further complicated by Meghan's siblings. Samantha Markle, Thomas's daughter from a previous marriage, was outspoken and occasionally critical, adding additional voices to an already complex narrative. The interplay between siblings, half-siblings, and parents created a web of relationships that could be both supportive and fractious. For Thomas, maintaining neutrality while supporting his children became a delicate balancing act, requiring diplomacy, patience, and emotional endurance. The public narrative at the time, however, often reduced these complexities to simplistic headlines: estranged father, wedding snub, or family rift. These descriptions failed to capture the decades of shared history, mutual care, and private moments that had defined Thomas's relationship with Meghan. Instead, they created a lens through which the world judged actions without understanding context, fueling misunderstandings that would later become irreparable. As the wedding approached, Thomas reportedly suffered additional stress and health concerns. The combination of excitement, fear, and public scrutiny placed immense pressure on him. He was torn between a father's natural desire to be involved and the awareness that his presence or absence would be judged by millions. Each decision was fraught. Every appearance, every comment, every gesture could be analyzed for signs of approval, disapproval, or estrangement. Yet despite the tension, there was a constant underlying theme: Thomas's enduring love for Meghan. Even as disagreements arose, even as misunderstandings piled up, he continued to express pride in her achievements. He was a father navigating uncharted territory, balancing the pride of seeing a child rise to global prominence with the painful reality of feeling distant from her life. And then came the moment that would change everything: the royal wedding itself. The event was meant to be a culmination of joy, family celebration, and historical significance. Yet for Thomas Markle, it became a moment of public scrutiny, personal disappointment, and emotional turmoil. The decision to stay away from the ceremony, influenced by health concerns and intense media pressure, set the stage for a long period of estrangement. The world saw a missing father. Thomas felt the weight of circumstance, fear, and an inability to participate in one of the most significant events of his life. The fallout was immediate. Headlines accused him of betrayal or negligence. Social media exploded with judgment, memes, and speculation. Yet behind the public outrage was a man grappling with conflicting emotions: love for his daughter, frustration with circumstance, and a profound sense of helplessness. The emotional stakes were already high, and this moment would resonate through the years that followed, shaping the dynamics of a fractured family in ways no one could have predicted. By the time the wedding day arrived, the foundation of estrangement had been laid. Minor conflicts had escalated, communication had broken down, and external pressures had magnified every tension point. Thomas's absence would be remembered not as a personal choice alone, but as a symbol of the complicated, often tragic, intersection of family, fame, and personal circumstance. The day was supposed to be the pinnacle of celebration, a fairy tale moment watched by millions across the globe. Meghan Markle, radiant in her gown, joined Prince Harry at St. George's Chapel, exchanging vows that were meant to unite not only two individuals, but also two worlds. It was, in theory, the culmination of dreams, hard work, and family support. Yet behind the smiles, the carefully orchestrated photographs, and the flawless ceremony, a quiet storm was brewing. Thomas Markle, the father who had raised Meghan, was absent, and that absence would become the defining moment of a family rift that would persist for years. For Thomas, the decision to stay away from the wedding was neither casual nor careless. Reports indicate that health concerns played a critical role. In the weeks leading up to the ceremony, Thomas suffered a heart attack and was under immense stress. Paparazzi ambushes and media speculation added layers of anxiety, making it difficult for him to function without fear of public scrutiny or personal collapse. He was not abandoning his daughter out of malice. He was navigating a perfect storm of health issues, emotional pressure, and external forces that few could understand. Yet the world rarely sees nuance. The public, hungry for drama and clarity, painted the situation in stark black and white terms. Headlines declared betrayal, disappointment, and failure. Social media erupted. Memes circulated mocking Thomas's absence, while commentators speculated endlessly about the reasons behind the estrangement. Every detail, every quote, every photograph, real or misinterpreted, was scrutinized as evidence of a fractured family. In the court of public opinion, subtlety was erased. Context vanished, and the man at the center of the storm found himself judged for decisions that were deeply personal and far more complex than the headlines suggested. Meghan's own position was delicate. As a bride entering one of the most publicized weddings in recent memory, she faced enormous pressure. The expectations of the royal family, the eyes of millions, and the weight of tradition collided with her personal desire to honor her father. Every move was calculated, every expression analyzed. For Meghan, reconciling her love for her father with the demands of royal protocol may have seemed impossible. Yet the fallout was immediate and visceral. The absence of Thomas Markle became the lens through which the world interpreted the entire relationship. The media coverage was relentless. Interviews, leaked emails, and speculation about Thomas's intentions created an environment of tension that only deepened the estrangement. It was no longer a private family matter. It had become a global narrative of disappointment, shame, and conflict. For a father who had worked behind the scenes all his life, this sudden spotlight must have been overwhelming. Suddenly, every choice was magnified, every perceived slight analyzed, and every emotion politicized. Family dynamics added another layer of complexity. Samantha Markle, Thomas's daughter from a previous marriage, became vocal in the media, criticizing Meghan and defending her father. Her commentary fueled public debate and added internal pressure to an already strained family network. For Thomas, navigating this external commentary while grappling with his own feelings of disappointment, pride, and love must have been emotionally exhausting. He was a father caught between supporting his daughter, defending his reputation, and maintaining his own health amid enormous stress. Yet despite the drama, there was a consistent theme. Thomas's love for Meghan never wavered. In interviews after the wedding, he expressed regret, longing, and an enduring sense of paternal pride. He acknowledged disagreements and mistakes, both his own and those of his daughter, but he also emphasized that familial love is complicated, layered, and sometimes painful. His words reflected a man grappling with a public narrative that often oversimplified the complexity of human relationships. The wedding, therefore, became a turning point. It was not merely an event, it was a symbol. Thomas's absence signaled a rupture in communication and connection that had been building for years. It transformed minor tensions into lasting estrangement, and it set the stage for future crises, where health emergencies, media scrutiny, and personal choices would collide in ways that tested the bonds of family and the limits of forgiveness. Consider the emotional weight on Thomas. A father missing the wedding of his daughter, a day he likely envisioned for decades, is an ache that cannot be quantified. The images, the celebrations, the news coverage, All of it underscored the reality that life had moved forward without him. For a man accustomed to controlling environments behind the scenes, being powerless in his own narrative must have been a profound challenge. His identity as a father, protector, and guide was overshadowed by circumstance and public perception. And then came the subtle shifts that foreshadowed a long-term estrangement. Communication between Thomas and Meghan became infrequent and strained. Attempts to reach out were filtered through advisors, misinterpreted, or met with silence. Every effort to reconcile was hindered by external pressures and internal hesitations. The world saw only snapshots, interviews, leaked letters, and public statements. The private moments, the conversations, regrets, and small gestures of affection remained hidden, leaving an incomplete narrative for the public to consume. The ripple effects were immediate and enduring. Social media discourse intensified, with fans, critics, and commentators debating the morality, loyalty, and responsibility of both Meghan and Thomas. Every new update about Meghan's life, career, or personal choices was filtered through the lens of estrangement. The absence of reconciliation at the wedding became a symbol not only of personal distance, but also of the emotional and social barriers that would dominate the relationship for years to come. By the end of the wedding fallout, a clear pattern had emerged. Estrangement was no longer temporary or circumstantial. It had become structural. Thomas remained distant. Meghan maintained her boundaries, and the public narrative solidified around a story of conflict, disappointment, and separation. The emotional stakes had never been higher, and the seeds for future crises had been planted, waiting for a moment that would demand attention, empathy, and perhaps reconciliation. Yet the story was far from over. The wedding was just the beginning of a chapter marked by health crises, public scrutiny, and choices that would continue to define the relationship between Meghan and her father. Thomas's resilience, previously tested by decades of personal challenges, would soon face one of the most urgent and dramatic tests of his life. And in the midst of it all, Meghan's absence would loom larger than ever, raising questions that no one could ignore. When will family come first? And is it possible to bridge a gap that seems unbridgeable in the glare of public judgment? How far can a family drift apart before reconciliation becomes almost impossible? For Thomas Markle and Meghan Markle, the years following the wedding revealed just how fragile relationships can become when pride, misunderstandings, and public scrutiny collide. What began as subtle tension, amplified by media attention and personal disagreements, transformed into a chasm that would take years to even approach bridging. The estrangement that began around the wedding quickly escalated, leaving both father and daughter navigating emotions that were as complex as they were painful. The initial months after the wedding were marked by a series of missed connections. Calls went unanswered, letters were delayed or filtered through advisors, and small attempts at dialogue often led to miscommunication. The pressures of Meghan's new life in the royal family added layers of complexity. Strict schedules, constant scrutiny, and the overwhelming expectation to maintain composure and uphold centuries of tradition. Each passing day without contact hardened the emotional divide, while the public continued to interpret silence in the harshest possible terms. Thomas's perspective during this period was one of both confusion and heartbreak. He had endured decades of personal challenges, including multiple health scares, yet this emotional isolation cut deeper than any physical ailment. His desire to reach out, to reconnect with his daughter, was constantly complicated by the fear of rejection, the interference of advisors, and the intense media spotlight. For Thomas, it became increasingly clear that even his genuine intentions could be misrepresented or weaponized in the court of public opinion. At the same time, Meghan faced her own pressures. Adjusting to royal life required navigating strict protocols, public expectations, and constant media scrutiny. Any attempt to reconnect with her father carried potential consequences, from criticism in tabloids to the risk of jeopardizing her family's public image. The combination of personal strain and external pressure created an environment where communication was not just difficult, it became almost impossible. Adding to the tension were public statements and interviews that highlighted disagreements and emotional friction. Thomas occasionally spoke to the media, expressing both pride and disappointment, while Meghan's team carefully curated her public narrative. Each statement, whether intended to explain or clarify, often became a source of further division. Misinterpretations and sensationalism fueled headlines that portrayed a relationship defined by conflict rather than complexity. The impact on the extended family was equally profound. Thomas Jr. and Samantha Markle, already aware of the strain between their father and sister, became increasingly vocal in the media. Their commentary often highlighted the emotional toll on Thomas Sr., emphasizing his longing to reconnect with his daughter and his concern for the family he had helped raise. Yet, even these efforts sometimes backfired, drawing criticism from royal watchers and social media audiences alike. The family, once united in private support, found itself fractured and scrutinized in the public eye. This period also revealed the emotional consequences of estrangement for Meghan herself. Behind the polished appearances and confident public persona, she was navigating guilt, criticism, and the challenges of maintaining boundaries. Estrangement is rarely one-sided. Both parties experience loss, longing, and frustration. In Meghan's case, the stakes were magnified by her public role and the visibility of her choices. Every decision about contact with her father was subject to speculation, judgment, and debate, adding psychological weight to an already complex emotional landscape. The escalation of estrangement was not solely about communication breakdowns. It was also influenced by deeper issues, differing values, generational expectations, and the unique pressures of fame and royalty. Thomas had grown up valuing tradition, family loyalty, and personal responsibility, while Meghan was navigating a modern, highly scrutinized life in the public eye. The collision of these worlds made understanding and compromise increasingly difficult, creating a feedback loop of misunderstanding, distance, and emotional strain. By the time Thomas's health crisis began, the estrangement had solidified into a pattern. Years of missed calls, unreturned messages, and misinterpreted intentions had created a barrier that seemed almost insurmountable. The father who had once hoped to walk his daughter down the aisle, to meet his grandchildren, and to maintain a close familial bond, now faced a situation where years of emotional distance had left him isolated. His vulnerability, combined with the immediacy of a medical emergency, highlighted the consequences of unresolved conflict and the heavy emotional cost of estrangement. Social media and public commentary continued to amplify the situation. Fans and critics debated responsibility, morality, and the right course of action. Headlines focused on Meghan's perceived neglect, while her supporters highlighted her personal boundaries and the pressures of royal life. This dual narrative created a tense, emotionally charged atmosphere where the family's private struggles became fodder for public consumption. For Thomas, the attention was both validating and painful, a recognition of his suffering, but also a reminder of his isolation and the fractured nature of his relationship with his daughter. The estrangement was further complicated by legal and media maneuvering. In the years following the wedding, attempts to manage information, protect privacy, and maintain public image often came into conflict with the family's emotional needs. Letters were scrutinized, interviews edited, and statements interpreted as evidence of ongoing conflict. In many ways, the public narrative created its own estrangement, reinforcing distance and misunderstanding while reducing opportunities for reconciliation. Amid all this, Thomas remained committed to his own principles. He expressed love for his daughter, tempered by disappointment over choices and missed opportunities. He did not vilify Meghan, nor did he cease hoping for connection. Instead, he navigated the delicate balance of expressing concern, protecting his own emotional well-being, and maintaining dignity in the face of relentless scrutiny. This approach, however, could not erase the growing distance. By the time Meghan and Thomas reached 2025, the estrangement had become a defining feature of their relationship. Years of miscommunication, public pressure, and emotional strain had created a gap that was both emotional and physical. Thomas's health crisis now exposed the fragility of human connection, demonstrating how years of unresolved tension could leave even the closest bonds vulnerable in the face of life-altering circumstances. The emotional stakes had never been higher. The absence of communication, the distance between father and daughter, and the relentless scrutiny of the world created a scenario ripe for heartbreak, regret, and difficult choices. Thomas's impending medical crisis would not only test his resilience, but also challenge Meghan's capacity for reconciliation, compassion, and decision-making under extraordinary pressure. And just when it seemed the estrangement could not deepen further, life introduced a new and terrifying variable. A blood clot, turning tissue black, forcing a 3-hour operation, and threatening Thomas's very survival. Suddenly, the emotional distance that had defined their relationship collided with a medical reality that demanded immediate attention, creating a tension that would grip the family and the world in ways no one could have predicted. What do you do when life suddenly becomes a race against time? For Thomas Markle, that moment arrived with terrifying swiftness. At 81 years old, he faced a medical emergency that left no room for delay, hesitation, or second-guessing. A blood clot had taken hold in his lower leg, spreading pain, swelling, and a deadly threat that would escalate faster than anyone could have imagined. Within hours, what might have seemed a routine concern turned into a life-or-death situation, a crisis that would define the stakes for his survival and test the bonds of a fractured family. The warning signs were sudden. Thomas's foot changed color, turning from pale to blue, then black. It happened almost overnight, a stark and terrifying transformation that demanded immediate action. His son, Thomas Jr., recounts the urgency. "I took him to a local hospital, and they did some scans and an ultrasound and said the leg had to be amputated." The word amputation carries a weight few can comprehend until it touches someone you love. In that moment, survival became a priority over all else. But the situation was more complex than it appeared. The local hospital, limited in resources, quickly determined that Thomas needed more specialized care. He was rushed to a larger facility in Cebu, Philippines, where surgeons could address not only the immediate danger, but the underlying risks that threatened his life. It was a move dictated by necessity, a recognition that medical expertise and rapid intervention were the only paths to survival. Thomas Jr. described the scene with stark honesty. "There was no option. I was told the leg had to be removed, and it was a case of life or death." These words underscore the gravity of the situation. In moments like this, time becomes both enemy and ally. Every second counts. Every decision carries weight. And for a man already navigating decades of health challenges, including heart attacks and a stroke, the stakes were even higher. The operation lasted 3 hours. Surgeons worked meticulously, removing the infected tissue and amputating part of his left leg. The procedure, though necessary, was only the first step in a series of battles that Thomas would face. Doctors remained extremely concerned for his safety, particularly about infection. The threat of sepsis or gangrene loomed large, and the next 2 to 3 days were critical. For a family already divided by years of estrangement, the urgency of the moment demanded attention, action, and, perhaps, reconciliation. Yet Meghan Markle remained absent. Despite the severity of the crisis, there was no contact from the Duchess of Sussex. No calls, no messages, no sign that she would make her way to the hospital to be by her father's side. For Thomas, this absence could not be ignored. It added a layer of emotional pain to an already physically perilous situation. It raised questions about loyalty, responsibility, and the limits of familial bonds in the face of life-threatening danger. Samantha Markle, Thomas's daughter, voiced the family's anxiety and hope. "He is a strong man, but he has been through so much. I am praying that he is strong enough to survive this." Her words capture the dual reality. Thomas is resilient, yet vulnerable, brave, yet dependent on the care of others. Every heart attack, every stroke, every previous hardship had prepared him for endurance, but not necessarily for the pain of estrangement layered on top of a critical medical emergency. The crisis also illuminated the complex emotions that arise in families fractured by distance and misunderstanding. On one hand, there is the pure, urgent need for survival, medical intervention, and immediate care. On the other hand, there is the emotional pain caused by absence, silence, and unresolved conflicts. For Thomas, the physical threat was compounded by the emotional distance of a daughter who had once been central to his life, but now remained unreachable. Medical experts warned that infection could spread rapidly. The flesh of his leg had turned black and was dying, a visual representation of the urgency and severity of the situation. The decision to operate was not a choice. It was a matter of survival. The surgeons acted decisively, aware that hesitation could mean life or death. In this context, the stakes of familial estrangement become painfully clear. Critical moments demand connection, and absence can be felt as acutely as pain itself. The next phase of Thomas's recovery would be fraught with uncertainty. The doctors remained concerned about additional complications, including the possibility that more of his left leg might need to be removed. The emotional toll of the situation was equally daunting. For a man accustomed to resilience, facing mortality while navigating estranged family relationships created a unique form of stress that few could fully understand. Throughout this ordeal, the world watched. Headlines highlighted Meghan's absence, social media erupted with speculation, and public opinion divided sharply. Some criticized her for perceived neglect, while others emphasized the pressures and complexities of her life in the royal family. Yet beyond the commentary, the human reality remained stark. Thomas Markle's life hung in the balance, and his need for care, support, and connection had never been more urgent. This crisis also revealed the limits of pride, ego, and public image. In situations like this, the human need for connection supersedes all else. Yet decades of estrangement cannot be undone instantly. Every unanswered call, every delayed message, every moment of absence compounds the emotional weight of the crisis, creating a scenario where survival is intertwined with reconciliation, forgiveness, and understanding. The story of Thomas Markle's health crisis is more than a tale of medical urgency. It is a story about the fragility of human relationships, the consequences of long-term estrangement, and the intersection of life and death situations with emotional reckoning. Every heartbeat, every step in recovery, and every decision about contact carries implications that extend far beyond the hospital walls. And just as the immediate danger seemed to stabilize, new concerns emerged. Doctors warned that the next 2 to 3 days would determine whether Thomas could survive without further complications. The threat of infection remained high, and his body, already weakened by age and previous health challenges, faced one of the most serious battles of his life. In these moments, the absence of family, especially a daughter with whom he had shared a deep bond, became a palpable, aching presence. Yet the crisis was far from over. Medical intervention had bought time, but survival was not guaranteed. Thomas's life now depended not only on the skill of his doctors, but also on the care, vigilance, and support surrounding him. And in the background, questions lingered. Would Meghan Markle reach out? Would a daughter who had once been central to his world bridge the gap before it was too late? The answers were uncertain, the stakes were high, and the tension was almost unbearable. And as the world waited for updates, the situation continued to unfold with a combination of medical urgency and emotional complexity that would define the next chapter of this story. When a crisis becomes public, it stops being just a private struggle. It becomes a spectacle, a story for the world to consume. Thomas Markle's health emergency was no exception. Within hours of news about his amputation and critical condition reaching the public, the global media descended, dissecting every detail, spinning narratives, and speculating on what it meant for Meghan Markle, her family, and the monarchy. Suddenly, an intensely private and painful moment was transformed into headlines, tweets, and viral posts. A vivid example of how fame and family collide in the most dramatic ways. The headlines were immediate and unforgiving. Meghan Markle abandons father in hospital. Royal rift deepens as estranged father faces life-threatening surgery. Duchess fails to contact dad amid amputation scare. Across newspapers, social media platforms, and news channels, the narrative was clear. Meghan Markle was absent at a moment of extreme need. Public opinion erupted. Some condemned her, accusing her of coldness and neglect. Others defended her, arguing that the complexities of estrangement and royal obligations made the situation far more complicated than the headline suggested. The debate raged on, often reducing deeply nuanced emotions into simplistic moral judgments. Social media amplified every statement, photograph, and rumor. Tweets condemning Meghan were retweeted thousands of times. Facebook and Instagram posts shared alleged explanations, leaked letters, or reinterpretations of her silence. Meme culture transformed the crisis into visual commentary, often poking fun or criticizing perceived negligence. The line between concern, outrage, and entertainment blurred. For Thomas Markle, the emotional impact of this coverage could have been almost as intense as the medical emergency itself. His private pain and his daughter's absence played out in real time on a global stage. Traditional media, however, also fueled the fire with conflicting narratives. Some outlets focused on Thomas's bravery and resilience, portraying him as a sympathetic figure struggling against life-threatening medical complications. Others emphasized Meghan's absence and framed her as neglectful or detached. The polarity of coverage created a fragmented story, one where facts, interpretations, and sensationalism collided. Audiences were left to pick sides, often without understanding the full context of years of family dynamics, estrangement, and personal boundaries. The public response was further complicated by Meghan's position as a member of the royal family. Every action, or inaction, was magnified. Critics argued that her privileged position should have compelled her to reach out, regardless of past grievances. Supporters countered that royal duties, strict protocols, and security concerns limited her options. The truth, as often happens in these situations, lay somewhere in between, obscured by the relentless glare of media scrutiny and social expectation. Adding fuel to the fire were personal statements from Thomas Jr. and Samantha Markle. They shared insights into their father's condition, expressing both worry and hope. Thomas Jr. described the urgency of the situation, emphasizing the life-or-death nature of the surgery, while Samantha highlighted the emotional toll of estrangement and the long history of familial challenges. Their comments, though genuine, were immediately seized upon by media outlets as evidence of Meghan's supposed failings, creating a narrative that combined both medical urgency and emotional drama in the public consciousness. The intense media scrutiny also had psychological effects. For Thomas, the combination of physical vulnerability, emotional distance from his daughter, and global attention must have been overwhelming. Every word spoken in interviews, every photograph released, every statement attributed to him was analyzed, dissected, and circulated. The media spotlight, relentless and unforgiving, added a new layer of stress, emphasizing how estrangement and fame can intertwine to magnify the pain of personal crises. Public commentary ranged from sympathetic to accusatory. Some saw Meghan's absence as an emotional failure, others as a complex reflection of the long-standing estrangement. Social media polls, hashtags, and viral campaigns debated the moral responsibilities of children toward estranged parents. Every development in Thomas's condition, every hospital update, became a new opportunity for debate, further blurring the line between private family hardship and global spectacle. This coverage also brought attention to the systemic pressures of celebrity, fame, and the monarchy. Meghan's life was under constant surveillance, with every action scrutinized against centuries of expectation, public interest, and media fascination. Her decisions regarding her father were interpreted not only through the lens of personal morality, but also in the context of royal protocol, public perception, and brand management. The result was a narrative that amplified tension, moral ambiguity, and emotional stakes in equal measure. The public's reaction, though often polarizing, underscored a universal truth. Family crises resonate deeply when filtered through a lens of fame. Millions could empathize with the pain of estrangement, the challenge of navigating conflicting loyalties, and the heartbreak of seeing a loved one in peril. Yet the scale of global attention added pressure that most families could never imagine, transforming an intensely personal moment into a public moral dilemma. Within this maelstrom, Thomas remained at the center, navigating both physical recovery and emotional turbulence. He had survived decades of health challenges, but the emotional and psychological stress of public scrutiny added an invisible weight. Every new article, every social media post, every comment on a news segment was a reminder that his struggle was no longer contained within hospital walls. The world was watching, judging, and interpreting, often without the context that made his story human rather than sensational. As days passed, the media continued to speculate on Meghan's response, or lack thereof. Headlines questioned her priorities, her compassion, and her familial loyalty. Yet behind the coverage, there remained a reality of complexity, decades of estrangement, communication breakdowns, and personal boundaries. The tension between public expectation and private choice became increasingly acute, highlighting how fame can complicate even the most fundamental human interactions. And then came the tipping point. As Thomas's recovery continued, reports emerged about the severity of his condition, the possibility of further complications, and the critical nature of his ongoing medical care. The media narrative intensified, amplifying both the urgency of his physical condition and the moral questions surrounding Meghan's involvement. Every new piece of information added layers to a story already heavy with drama, tension, and heartbreak. The public and media reaction, in many ways, became a character in the story itself, a force influencing decisions, shaping perceptions, and amplifying emotional stakes. For Thomas, Meghan, and their extended family, the glare of scrutiny transformed a private health crisis into a global spectacle, creating pressure that was both immediate and unrelenting. When a health crisis strikes, it rarely affects only the individual. The ripples of fear, concern, and emotional tension extend outward, touching every member of the family. In the case of Thomas Markle, his emergency surgery and life-threatening condition illuminated not just the physical stakes, but also the complex web of family dynamics, long-standing grievances, and unhealed wounds that had defined relationships for years. This was not just a medical crisis. It was an emotional crucible, testing loyalties, revealing fractures, and exposing truths that had long been buried under layers of misunderstanding. Thomas Jr., his devoted son, became an unexpected anchor in this storm. For weeks leading up to the amputation, he had monitored his father's health, coordinated medical care, and provided updates to worried relatives. His perspective was both practical and emotionally charged. He understood the gravity of the situation, the speed at which the blood clot had spread, the risk of infection, and the potential life-or-death decisions that would need to be made. At the same time, he grappled with the family's fractured relationships, including the strained connection between his father and Meghan. Every medical decision carried emotional weight, and every update risked being misinterpreted by the public, the media, and even the family itself. Samantha Markle, Thomas's daughter, added another layer of complexity. She was outspoken, vocal in interviews, and unafraid to express frustration with Meghan's absence. Her protective instincts toward her father were palpable, yet her words sometimes fueled media narratives that complicated the emotional landscape further. Samantha's perspective illustrated the tension inherent in families divided by distance and estrangement. Deep loyalty to one parent, combined with frustration over another's absence, can create both solidarity and conflict simultaneously. The extended family watched anxiously, many caught between the public spectacle and private anguish. Conversations over the phone, WhatsApp messages, and private calls reflected concern, urgency, and, at times, frustration. Older relatives expressed worry not only about Thomas's physical survival, but about the psychological impact of estrangement and the looming question of whether Meghan would intervene. Each family member brought their own history, biases, and emotions to the situation, complicating the decision-making process and intensifying the emotional stakes. At the center of this complex web was Thomas himself. Already facing a critical health emergency, he also had to contend with the realities of estrangement. The absence of his daughter, who had once been central to his life, was acutely felt. He had experienced decades of health challenges, yet the emotional weight of family distance added a layer of vulnerability that no surgery could address. Even in the sterile environment of a hospital room, surrounded by doctors and nurses, the emotional void left by estrangement was palpable. The internal dynamics were further complicated by differing opinions about how to handle communication. Thomas Jr. advocated for transparency, hoping that media updates might encourage Meghan to reach out. Samantha, however, sometimes expressed frustration and anger, emphasizing the moral responsibility of a daughter to her father. These conflicting perspectives highlight the difficulty of managing family crises in the public eye. Even when intentions are aligned, emotions, interpretations, and public scrutiny can amplify tension, creating challenges that extend beyond the immediate medical concerns. Meanwhile, other extended family members remained largely silent, observing from a distance. Their caution reflected an awareness of how volatile public commentary could be and the potential for any statement to exacerbate tension. Silence, however, does not equal inaction. For these relatives, each moment of observation carried emotional weight. The fear of speaking out too soon, the anxiety of waiting for developments, and the uncertainty of how to intervene effectively without worsening existing divisions. Throughout this period, private communication became a minefield. Emails, messages, and attempted phone calls were filtered through advisors, misinterpreted, or left unanswered. Each attempt to bridge the gap required careful calculation, emotional resilience, and patience. Missteps could be amplified publicly, while inaction risked further emotional strain. For a family already dealing with years of unresolved tension, the stakes were enormous. Every interaction, or lack thereof, could influence outcomes in ways no one could fully anticipate. The family's emotional landscape was further complicated by underlying grievances that had persisted for years. Past disagreements, perceived slights, and unresolved conflicts all resurfaced in the context of the crisis. Emotions ran high. Anger, frustration, guilt, and fear mingled with love, concern, and hope. The amputation and critical condition of Thomas acted as a catalyst, bringing these buried tensions to the surface and forcing each family member to confront the emotional realities of estrangement, loyalty, and personal responsibility. Within the household, practical decisions about care and recovery also highlighted internal dynamics. Coordinating medical attention, arranging for rehabilitation, and managing hospital logistics required collaboration. Yet, even these decisions were influenced by emotional undertones. How to communicate with Meghan, how to manage media attention, and how to support Thomas without adding additional stress. Every choice was a balancing act, blending medical necessity with emotional sensitivity. The family's reactions also reflected a broader question. What does love mean in the face of conflict? Is it defined by presence, communication, or simply by enduring care from a distance? For Thomas Jr. and Samantha, love manifested as action, coordinating care, staying by their father's side, and publicly advocating for attention to his needs. For Meghan, love remained complicated by distance, estrangement, and public pressure. The situation underscored a fundamental truth. Love in families is rarely simple, especially when layered with history, fame, and public scrutiny. As Thomas's recovery progressed, the family dynamic remained tense. Each day brought both hope and uncertainty. The operation had succeeded in saving his life, but risks of infection, complications, and further amputation loomed. Simultaneously, the emotional stakes remained high. Would Meghan finally reach out? Would the family's public narrative influence private decisions? Would unresolved issues continue to cast a shadow over Thomas's recovery? And as the family navigated these tensions, they were acutely aware of how fragile the situation was. One misstep, one miscommunication, could deepen estrangement or exacerbate emotional pain. The pressure was enormous, but so too was the potential for reconciliation or for irreversible distance. Yet even amidst all this tension, hope flickered. Thomas's resilience, the dedication of his children, and the possibility of bridging years of estrangement created a fragile but real chance for connection. The next decisions, the next messages, and the next interactions would determine whether this crisis would be another chapter of division or a turning point toward understanding and repair. Silence can speak louder than words. In the case of Meghan Markle's estrangement from her father, that silence was deafening. While Thomas Markle faced a life-threatening medical crisis, the absence of any communication from his daughter became not just a talking point in the media. It became a symbol of the emotional distance that had defined their relationship for years. Questions swirled. Why had Meghan not reached out? What did her silence mean for her father, her family, and her own moral compass? And most importantly, what would this reveal about the true nature of family, loyalty, and love? For years, Meghan had been navigating a precarious path between her public role as a member of the royal family and her personal relationships. Her marriage to Prince Harry brought unprecedented scrutiny, creating pressures few could understand. Every action, every word, every decision was examined under a microscope. This constant surveillance shaped not only her public persona, but also her private interactions, particularly with family members like Thomas. In this context, her silence during a medical emergency was not merely a personal choice. It was a decision fraught with consequences, both emotional and public. The implications of silence are multi-layered. On a personal level, Thomas Markle's pain was intensified. Already weakened by age, prior health challenges, and the immediate crisis of his leg amputation, the absence of contact from his daughter compounded his emotional vulnerability. Love and care, when expressed through presence or communication, can provide immense comfort. When absent, it can deepen despair, heighten feelings of isolation, and exacerbate physical and psychological stress. Thomas's situation highlighted the profound emotional impact of estrangement and the ways silence can become a form of emotional weight. From a public perspective, Meghan's silence became a lightning rod. Headlines and social media commentary speculated endlessly, framing her absence in moralistic terms. Critics accused her of coldness, neglect, and emotional detachment. Supporters argued that estrangement and complex family history made any immediate outreach complicated, emphasizing boundaries and personal autonomy. The debate highlighted a fundamental tension. How much responsibility does a child have toward a parent, especially when past grievances and estrangement complicate the relationship? Psychologists and family experts often note that estranged relationships operate on a delicate balance of history, perception, and communication. In Thomas and Meghan's case, years of misunderstandings, miscommunications, and emotional distance had created barriers that were not easily overcome. Every attempt at contact required careful negotiation of emotions, public perception, and personal boundaries. Silence, in this context, was both a symptom and a strategy, a way to protect oneself emotionally, while simultaneously leaving unresolved grief and pain in its wake. The silence also had broader implications for Meghan's public image. As a member of the royal family and a global celebrity, every action or inaction was subject to moral evaluation. By not reaching out to her father during a critical health crisis, Meghan risked being framed as emotionally distant or neglectful, a narrative that would dominate media discourse and social commentary. Yet this judgment often ignored the decades of estrangement, the advice of her inner circle, and the complexities of navigating both fame and private family challenges. Moreover, silence can create space for speculation, rumor, and misinterpretation. Every day, without a message, call, or public acknowledgement became fodder for media outlets and social media users, each offering their own interpretation of motives, emotions, and consequences. The absence of information intensified curiosity, amplified moral judgments, and magnified emotional stakes. Silence, in this sense, did not equate to absence of care. It equated to uncertainty, frustration, and moral debate on a global scale. Family dynamics further complicated matters. Thomas Jr. and Samantha Markle, already vocal about their concerns, interpreted Meghan's silence as a continuation of estrangement and emotional neglect. Their advocacy highlighted the moral and emotional dimensions of the situation, emphasizing the human cost of distance and unresolved conflict. At the same time, their statements added pressure on Meghan, further complicating her decision-making and intensifying the public narrative of guilt, responsibility, and emotional distance. The implications extended beyond media perception. For Thomas Markle, the absence of communication from his daughter represented a painful reality. Love, expressed through connection, can be delayed, denied, or complicated by unresolved conflict. Estrangement magnifies these absences, transforming a personal choice into a symbol of broader emotional and relational fracture. Every day of silence became another layer of psychological strain, exacerbating both his vulnerability and the sense of urgency surrounding his medical condition. Meanwhile, Meghan faced her own internal conflicts. Navigating the delicate balance between personal boundaries, family history, and public scrutiny is an emotional challenge few can comprehend. Silence can be protective, offering space to process emotions, avoid conflict, and manage overwhelming external pressures. But silence also carries cost. It can perpetuate estrangement, deepen emotional wounds, and create public narratives that may misrepresent intentions. Meghan's silence, therefore, was a double-edged sword, reflecting both self-preservation and the inevitable consequences of absence. The broader public also responded in complex ways. Some saw her absence as a betrayal of familial duty. Others recognized the extraordinary pressures she faced as a public figure. Commentators debated morality, loyalty, and emotional responsibility, often overlooking the nuances of estrangement, generational conflict, and personal trauma. Yet these debates highlighted a universal tension. How do individuals balance personal boundaries with societal expectations, especially in moments of life and death urgency? Silence, as this situation demonstrated, has both immediate and long-term consequences. In the short term, it can intensify pain, heighten emotional stress, and amplify public scrutiny. In the long term, it can define relationships, shape narratives, and influence decisions that may have lasting impact. For Thomas and Meghan, the silence during his medical crisis became a defining moment. One that crystallized the estrangement, tested familial bonds, and set the stage for decisions and revelations that would resonate far beyond the hospital walls. The absence of communication also raised moral and ethical questions. Should past grievances be set aside in moments of extreme vulnerability? Does the gravity of a life-threatening situation create a moral imperative to reach out? Or do personal boundaries, emotional safety, and complex history justify continued distance? These questions have no easy answers, yet they lie at the heart of every estranged family dynamic, magnified exponentially by fame, media attention, and global scrutiny.